Is there nothing in what I say to you?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's always someone older and wiser one should talk to, I think. And I think I sort of look across the shoulder towards the other end of the house where
Right.
my father is sleeping. And then I look at him, back at him again, but sometimes we younger people, maybe reckless, maybe less experienced, need to just make a decision.
He flashes the classic white teeth grin that probably just gathers dozens of people, to jump into saddles whenever he says. You can just see it as he flashes the grin and he says, I have heard this before.
I bet you have. So, I tell you this. I will give you back the money, and I will wish to follow you to some of the persons you're talking about.
You want me to arrange a meeting? Why, yes, I can. He says, Senor, I am getting excited.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I leave him at that point and say I will come back later.
He says, "Oh, well, I don't want to presume on your hospitality. Perhaps another night, if that is all right. Another night of recovery." And he sort of stops himself from mentioning the fine food that he has been consuming, but it might be part of it. And then he says, "Another evening, and then I will go."
And then it's
he kind of bites back the words, "Giving me back the money." All of it? I mean, he's still okay. So I'm not seeing much of a conflict here. You actually managed to sort of narrow in on something here. So he says, yes, one of your the someone will give you the information you need. Perhaps I can't promise, but in the next few days for sure, I think. Seguro. So let's see here. In the next few days, so he will leave the next day. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. He kind of rides out with sort of a creepy crawly between his shoulder blades, wondering if he's going to get a bullet, on the way. But he can't bring himself. He refuses. He's too proud to actually show it much. But when he's out of range, he certainly will, relax considerably, and make his way out of there. He does give you a name. He says, when there'll be a meeting with Adele, a woman's name. So that is, that's the end of that. Wow. Well.
Cool.
Now let's take a break just for a minute. We'll play some more, but let's take a break just for a minute and chat a little bit. What are your? I don't always like to debrief game systems while we play. In fact, I usually don't. But on the other hand, what are you seeing? I'm curious. I mean, about the game, about what we're doing.
Yeah. Do you want to say something, Hans? Or
yeah, I mean, I read. Yeah, sure. I'll talk since I'm talking, I guess. I I jumped on the At It Play this morning just briefly and kind of, just skimmed a couple things, and I want to read in more detail, but I saw your little diagram, Ron, about the pool and like the 4 arrows and and kind of what you were, I couldn't quite grasp the importance of the game, or like, what it does really, until I kind of saw that. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, that what it's doing is just kind of revealing how play works in a very bare bones way almost. So yeah, I think for me, I'm seeing the sort of the definition of what's a conflict and what's not is really important, which is like, for most role playing games that is an important thing, but it's just very kind of naked here.
Right.
Which I think
It seems to me that my dialogue with Manu in the Frog Fantasy thread is kind of sitting hard with me right now. I'm really thinking about it, especially because I'm going to be teaching a class about the pool. So I'm thinking a lot about what I'm going to try to put there. I have to refine things into very teachable chunks. And one of the most important points is, in this game, I think we all have to understand that once a roll is made, when we pick up after resolution, the scene we are in has changed. It may close or not. That's not important specifically, but there has been a change. Things have, for your character in particular, in the circumstances around them, whether it's large scale in the bigger setting due to implications, or whether it's right here, upon the character, either way, but something, when resolution is over, you don't just have a change in number. That's, I think, the main thing. In many games, the only change that is guaranteed to occur in a conflict is some change in a number. And that's it. And then it's sort of up to whoever's job it is to decide what that means for the next thing and whether it means anything. I'm thinking of playing Monster Hearts, when I played Monster Hearts, and how dreadful it was. I mean, literally dreadful. You would run, there would be some sort of conflict, and there would be all this kind of gaudy talk about teenage monsters doing dreadful things. And then the roll would be made, and somebody takes a string on somebody. And then there was no sort of understanding that whatever the conflict was about would itself have to be resolved in such a way so that the whole situation changes. Right? Maybe not the grand situation of the entire scenario, but, the scene at least. And that's... when I first read Monster Hearts, I went in sort of assuming that's how you would do it, and I never noticed its absence from all the examples, from any understanding of play, anything. When I played it as a player, I was often kind of flailing around thinking, what is this game master doing? We just had this big conflict, and now what has changed? And it's like, well, what do you do now? And you're kind of going, but what's the new now? Right? What is this? I mean, okay, so this guy got a string on that guy, but isn't that just a side effect? I mean, that's not what the conflict was about. That's a side effect. But if you look at the rules, those are the only results there are, is stuff like that. Does that make any sense? I mean, you have play just kind of wallows around in however the game master wants the story to go on from here.
Yeah, it's like, here's the number result, and kind of use that as your sort of your tarot card interpreter, maybe, of what happens next, kind of.
But the point is that there's no mention of that, and people learning the game, because you see, that's what I would do.
Right.
And I realized that the culture of playing the game, and the people I was playing with and everything, they had no concept of that at all. In fact, it was perhaps a feature to them, or they thought it was a feature, that, our joyous PBTA consensus would somehow, generate the next scenes and stuff like that. But really, it's I'm always talking about the ball, the ball of play that keeps moving. and it would just hit the floor and deflate each time after a die roll. Somebody would have to pick it up, blow it back full up with content, and start play again.
Yeah, I haven't read Monster House, so I can't say anything about that. But it feels I can recognize exactly those moments.
Yeah,
and maybe even when you play yourself and you haven't really thought about what is a conflict, and then you rush into something, and then you roll dice, and then maybe this wasn't a conflict, and
right.
you sort of gets there when nothing really changes because nothing was at stake in the first place. So I can see what you're saying about the play of it.
It becomes if you're relying on the system to take care of you for this, then a system like that doesn't do it. And then when you play something like the pool, you realize that no system can really do that for you. This has to be part of the chassis of play that we all recognize, that events that we put some time into for resolving things really ought to make a new now.
Well, you can't go to the dice to like create the excitement or whatever, you know. Right. It's like, yeah, like you're saying, Christopher, like, oh, what's the conflict? Let's look for the conflict so we can go to the dice and like feel comfortable all of a sudden. But yeah, like, you know, we had that moment where it could have been a conflict with Mondragon, and it ended up not being, but it was just as exciting to me as a player, whether we had done it or not, you know.
Yeah, the main issue for me is that if you have if you're familiar with games in which the numerical consequences are very concrete, but they're also very localized in your character, hit points or something like it, sanity checks, things like that. And those consequences are very localized in your character, then okay, whatever the game master says happens next, your character has changed. So that's enough of a new now for you. Right? I mean, situations are made of locations and characters in them, backstories and stuff like that. So if I'm changed enough, I have recovered. I'm full up. I gained this great roll, and I'm full up on my, you know, on my resource. And I'll stride into the next scene very differently than if I had been, you know, knocked down considerably and would be perhaps playing more cautiously or even more boldly. Who knows? It depends on what kind of player I am. But you see what I mean? That's your reference point. Your reference point are these kinds of, and that's where you get play too, which becomes a little bit obsessed with. It's almost solipsistic. You're obsessed with your character's well-being. You're obsessed with your character's resource management, because really that's the only thing that you know actually changes due to conflicts. There's a way of playing dungeons that I think was most evident in the earliest days, where the dungeon was played very responsively. If there was a fight in this room, then either other characters in the dungeon heard it, or the ones who heard it or ran away from it or something would talk to other people, and pretty soon a whole bunch of the different communities in the dungeon would be behaving differently now. So
not a static net of encounters. It's a living
exactly, and that sort of fell apart in the face of somewhat lazier dungeon play that basically says, okay, so what's in this room? We deal with that. Okay, so what's in this room? We deal with that. And especially because the modules were contradictory, they came from the tournament, so they had a little box of what you were supposed to read right there. But on the other hand, it also encouraged you in some cases to play more responsibly, and would give a list, you know, if they, but it was it had to be general advice, because you can't say play responsibly and then give this enormous menu of all the things, right? So therefore you're getting a mixed message. Play this whole scenario responsibly, or read all these beautiful little boxes that we have pre-written for what the players see, and they're carefully balanced, and they say exactly what they do and they don't see, and it's so perfect, right? So you kind of inadvertently train people into just playing each of these like a bubble. So all of that fell apart even worse in the face of the pre-planned scenario, getting through the mystery, getting through the town, getting through the murder inn traps, getting through the caravan journey through the hills, all the things, that you follow that are so codified. In all of those cases, what actually happens to you during conflicts, or what happens at all during conflicts, as long as you don't die, is insanely irrelevant. I mean, profoundly irrelevant. So somewhere along the way, actually having a story emerge with plot became decoupled from anything to do with rolling dice and handling conflicts and dealing with those nuances inside it. It just got decoupled. And I mean, in the Nordic tradition, the hatred for the dice, those silly old leftovers, right, from wargaming, those terrible, what we want to make stories, we don't want to play Yahtzee, right, is that thing. A very, very living tradition of talking about play right now, and has been for a couple of decades. I think it comes straight from that. There's this. So anyway, I'm sorry to just speechify, to make speeches at you, but these are the things that I'm putting together while I'm playing the pool so much and trying to get the right phrasing for things.
Yeah.
Get an idea. So, yeah, I don't know. Any other?
I've played the pool, I think, 2 or 3 times before. It was a long time ago, the first. And actually, the first time it was a dungeon crawl. We just delved into this
perfectly suitable for it too.
Fafhrd and Mouser kind of style, and it worked out great. It was wonderful. And then when we tried it later on with different people, I think we too much delved into this monologue of victory and not thinking about, and the rule text doesn't really say what can you say, what can you not say, and the examples is really
it's what happens when you don't play the game you're designing and writing.
The examples are really so you put in stuff, you sort of pass stick narration and story creating at the same time, and it's I think it's one of the great things now to realize when you mentioned that you really need to look at it and design it, or sort of make choices about it.
I've dialed back the monologue of victory. That's definitely something I do. I'm not saying, and I will say one thing, that rescuing Elvio, I was really debating on where Elvio was.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice that it wasn't until after you rescued him that I finally identified the rider over in the west. And I was wondering, okay, he's taking the monologue of victory. Should I give him the backstory situation that Elvio's not there? Am I sure that's the case? Is that really? And I was thinking, why don't we let it bleed a little bit into more situational authority? Well, I mean, I keep saying it's narration authority, but you're also getting a little outcome. You're also getting a little situation. There's wiggle room there, right? And so I decided to just keep my mouth shut. And I'm saying, you know what? It's going to be up to Hans. It's going to be up to Hans where Elvio is. And that was so in a way, I'm saying that I don't want to be so restrictive that the monologue of victory just becomes, oh, good, you get to describe, your sword swing. It needs to be a little bit, more than that. But you can see that I'm also reluctant to just let it suddenly become GM for the day.
Right. Whatever I say goes. I recreate the world or whatever.
Right. So, and as I say, I don't think James had any actual play experience with any of that. So he had no standards for what he was writing. He was just trying to kind of like manage all this excitable babble that was being thrown at him from multiple sources.